I'm Zach Walker, and this is the DIUx podcast, where we catch up with DIUx alumni. I'm joined today by Lieutenant Junior Grade Tom Wester. Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here, Zach. Thanks.
So, Tom, you are very special. You were in DIUx from 2016 to 2018, but you were in as an ensign. So, for those that don't know, that is an O1, a brand new baby junior officer doing wonderful things for DIUx in the space portfolio. I'm sure the question on everyone's mind would be, how in the world did you get to DIUx as a brand new commissioned officer?
Yeah, so I commissioned from the Naval Academy in 2016, and my first assignment was earning a master's degree at Stanford University. And so I came out to the West Coast, moved out to Palo Alto, and one of the things that I wanted to do while I was at Stanford was to still stay engaged within the defense ecosystem, because I was moving, changing from a very military environment at the Naval Academy to a much more civilian environment at Stanford, and I wanted to stay engaged throughout that time with the DoD. And so as I was moving out, I also wanted to come into Silicon Valley, wanted to do something, work on something cutting edge. And so one of my mentors at the Naval Academy introduced me to Mark Gorenflow, who was then at DIU, and he basically interviewed me, a very pseudo interview, asked me a couple questions, and then had me come in and just kind of see what the organization was like. And so it was right during the transition from DIU 1.0 to DIU 2.0. And I came in and he kind of gave me free reign. So I went around and I met all the people within the organization and learned about the mission, and was essentially told, if there's someone who wants your talent, wants your time, feel free to work on whatever you want. And as I was going through meeting all these people, I met now Brigadier General Buteau, Bucky, who was then and still is the head of the space portfolio lead. And I knew nothing about space at the time, but was really intrigued, always kind of interested in space. And so ended up asking him if there was anything that I could help him out with. And he came up with a long list of things for me. And since while I was at grad school, I still had some available free time. And so I was able to kind of help slowly start on some of those things, learn about the organization, learn about the process, and eventually morphed into this very wonderful opportunity where I was able to attend graduate school at Stanford, earning my master's, and still also work as a PM at DIU on the side. And so a very untraditional pathway, but very happy that it worked out the way it did.
And it got you some pretty remarkable exposure to a really joint organization. And I'm curious what it's like as an O1 or ensign to be in a joint organization with primarily field grade officers, a lot of contractors, certainly not the traditional assignment. What was that like?
So being an O1 within the organization was really interesting. It was the first time where I was ever, told for these higher ranking officers, call me by my first name, call me by my call sign. So that in and of itself, just culturally, was very different than what I was exposed to. But for me, it was really humbling to be a part of the organization because it pushed me to think in ways that I really hadn't before. So, especially as a young junior officer, you kind of think within your own microcosm. Me now, I'm a surface warfare officer, so a lot of my thought goes to the surface community, surface warfare. And at DIU, it was bringing in people from all different backgrounds, whether it be commercial executives, whether it be career officers or reservists. It was bringing in all these people from different backgrounds who all had different experiences and were able to think at a much greater level, think at an organizational level. And so it really drove me to think at that level as well. I would also say the opportunity to learn from all those different experiences. I think DIU is probably full of some of the most unique people within the DoD who have the most kind of interesting stories. And so being able to hear how they progressed through their career and kind of what they've done, as well as learn from their experiences, is huge too. But I think especially as no one, it was a pretty steep learning curve. Especially I knew nothing about contracting. I didn't even know what an OTA or what the FAR was when I first got there, and so it was a very steep learning curve for me just from a baseline perspective. And then, like I mentioned, I worked primarily on space and didn't have much of a background in space, so I spent many nights reading.
No, that's great though. And then you left DIU and went into the fleet. And I'm curious if you could share a story maybe of something you were doing that reminded you of your time when you were in DIUx.
Yeah, so right after I finished at DIU, I moved down to San Diego and then served on board USS HOWARD, DDG-83, which is home port out of San Diego. And we were doing a maintenance availability at the time. And so I got the opportunity to essentially cross deck to the USS Meyer, who was doing a Westpac deployment or a deployment in the Western Pacific. And during my time at DIU, one of my big foci was a project on maritime domain awareness, essentially using commercial sensors and analytics to look at achieving persistent real-time analysis of activities in the South China Sea. And so within the South China Sea, the project focused specifically on some of the contested island chains. And when I was out on Meyer in the South China Sea, I think probably one of the most interesting and unique experiences was we had the opportunity to do several FONOPs, or freedom of navigation operations. And one of those was right by some of the islands that I had previously done the work on at DIU. And so Fiery Cross Reef was one of them. And I just remember when I was working with Orbital Insight on developing the product alongside our Navy partners, looking at Fiery Cross Reef as a green outline on the screen with all these dots around it that represented different ships. And then to have the opportunity to sail past it during a freedom of navigation operation where, I could look through the binoculars and I could see the little fishing vessels that were in the imagery that we had. And I could see the other Chinese warships that were out there with us. And I could actually see the island and the palm trees and all the structures on it. And it was just a really interesting, unique experience to be working on a project that supported a specific AOR and then to actually be able to go out in that AOR and execute mission tasking.
Yeah, that's a really cool experience. Now, I know you weren't technically assigned to DIUx, but you had amazing accomplishments and really contributed to the space portfolio. But I still have to ask if there was one thing you wish you had known, or a few things you wish you had known before you got to DIUx, what would those be?
So I wish I had like a baseline level of knowledge of space and contracting as this sort of, but no, so I think one of the things that not necessarily that I would have known, but things I wish I would have done was, like I mentioned at the beginning, I kind of tried to separate my experience at Stanford and my experience at DIU. I wanted to kind of keep the civilian education so that I could see what it was like from that perspective, having gone to a military academy for undergrad. But I think I could have done a better job of integrating those. There was a lot of crossover, especially within the Silicon Valley, where the ties between the DoD and industry are so strong and have been for a long time. I think I could have done a better job integrating those two and maybe done a couple projects or some focused coursework at Stanford, where I looked at DIU and innovation within the DoD from more of an academic perspective, less of a practitioner perspective.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. And you mentioned your story about seeing some of the islands when you were out on the water, but I'm curious if you had any other lessons that you could share from your time in DIUx.
So a couple lessons for sure. When I first was at DIU, we were going through this transition, as I mentioned, from DIUx 1.0 to DIUx 2.0. And I think whenever you try to do something innovative and different, you get some pushback. And so one of the biggest lessons, my biggest takeaways was the value of persistence and hard work. Within the space portfolio, we had a couple efforts very early on that were not necessarily the most heavily embraced by other entities within the Department of Defense. And so our ability and really Bucky's ability to see what the future looks like and to push through despite any setbacks that we might have had, I think really brought meaningful capabilities to the organization where they otherwise might not have happened. Additionally, I think that one of the biggest lessons learned was the value of just asking questions. So my whole goal at DIU was to be a sponge, ask questions, and that kind of desire to learn more led to some pretty unbelievable experiences. I mean, I had the opportunity to see companies grow over the 2 years that I was there, from small startups to very well established kind of what we call within the space domain, space flight proven hardware, and kind of interact with those executives of those companies at different levels, but to also engage with folks from top venture capital firms, as well as people within the Department of Defense who really think at a strategic level. And so just asking and being inquisitive and wanting to learn for me was huge, because it opened up a lot of doors that I think if I had just kind of stayed quiet wouldn't have otherwise been there. And then the last and probably the most important thing I learned is that culture matters a lot. I think DIU has its own unique culture within the DoD. As I mentioned, it's a total first name basis, almost regardless of rank, and which is very non-traditional within the Department of Defense. And so, having that different culture, and there are other examples, but having that different culture really made the organization more effective. And so, what it showed me was that culture is such a valuable piece of an organization, and it's imperative to that organization's success. And so that's something that even I can take back with me here in the Navy.
Yeah, it was a very special culture. What has it been like for you going back into the fleet? I assume that you don't talk to all of the 06s and 07s on a first name basis in the Navy, or okay.
My captain is definitely captain, and so I think one of the great things as well for me was that I had it was almost like I don't want to say a rest period, but it was an opportunity for me to kind of recharge my batteries a little bit, and as well as see, as I mentioned, broadly looking just beyond the Navy. And so I was so much more excited to join the surface fleet after my experience at DIU than I was before my experience at DIU. I was just really motivated, kind of like I said, being able to look at the islands on a platform on a computer is one thing, but then actually getting the opportunity to go out and sail past them is something entirely different. And so I think it motivated me a lot more as I was going into the fleet. And then also I was able to take those lessons learned with me into the fleet to kind of say, as a new division officer, what do I want the culture within, my little organization, my little division to be, and how can I influence the culture of our ship and, hopefully the Navy.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of alumni that are really at the start of their career. And you have many, many years ahead of you in the Navy if you choose to do so. How could DIU do a better job of engaging alumni like you that are still pretty junior, still have a lot of time to go, but have a tremendous potential to have an impact on the DoD?
So I think that doing things like this, it's pretty difficult once you're outside of the NDA world to stay totally up to speed with what's going on. Especially within the commercial ecosystem, because it moves so quickly. But I think one of the most lasting things about DIU is the relationships that I have with the people who are there. You interviewed Enrique Odi a couple weeks ago, and so being able to have relationships like that reach totally across the services, I think is as that network grows, I think people will kind of continue to foster those relationships as they move forward, and as well as getting the word out there. I think that DIU-exers can be kind of some of the biggest proponents in some ways about thinking in new ways, especially because a lot of them are so innovative as they come into the organization and then proceed out of it even more so.
Couldn't agree more. So what's next for you as a DIU-exer, and how can we help you?
So as a DIU-exer, so I am about to take over as the Navigator on board USS HOWARD, which has got a missile destroyer. So I'm called fleeting up. So I did my first tour there. I'll do my second tour there. I'm in school right now in Newport, Rhode Island, learning how to safely navigate and bring that back to the ship. And so I'll do about 2 years there, and then move on to shore duty after that. And so I think one of the biggest things about DIU is keeping the relationships that we have. I think I rely on Bucky as a mentor now, and so that's been a relationship that I've used a lot. I've talked to him fairly frequently, and it's great because he's so far removed from some of the Navy centric things that I have to deal with, but being able to have him as a mentor from a morality standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, has been really huge. And so, just being open to continuing to allow me to reach back into the organization has been awesome.
That's great. Well, we were very lucky to have you, and we're really glad that you still want to be involved and participate. Any final words?
No, I would just say thank you for the opportunity. Being able to work at DIU, when I first showed up, everybody was like, I don't know what he's doing. And so having an organization that was willing to say, yeah, sure, we'll have you come and help out, I think speaks volumes about the culture of it, because there are likely not a lot of other places where you'd have a brand new ensign who knows absolutely nothing come in and have people say, yeah, absolutely, we can help you out, and we're willing to teach you stuff, and we're willing to help work with you. So for all the people at the organization when I got there who were just so wonderful at either helping me, helping kind of walk me through the the acquisition process, or to all the way through towards providing what Bucky provides, which is a lifetime mentor. I mean, it's been an absolutely tremendous experience. So I just want to say thank you.
That's great. Well, again, thank you for what you've done and what you are doing for the Navy and will do for the nation. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Zach.